I had hoped the beefy weight for the Chaos Space Marines Codex would mean that the book would have been a home run with little to criticize. But lo and behold, it's a mess. In fact, it behooves me to warn you that if you go through this book, it may leave you with a case of the
brain scramblies.
Jokes aside, the Codex does get some things right from its predecessor. The most important of which is that the rules within are far, far more valid, not resulting in entire subfactions being relegated to bottom tier by comparison to the offerings within its own publication. However, that win is undercut by a different set of issues, the list of which is as long as it is bizarre. And so I've put together a WhatTheFAQ for the 9th edition Chaos Space Marines Codex. Like its 8th edition incarnation, WhatTheFAQ is designed to be used in concert with its relevant publication, making it an easy point of reference for use in your local playgroups, where you can take and leave its amendments at your discretion. You can find a link to WhatTheFAQ Chaos Space Marines 9th edition in the description of this video. And if you want to contribute to this FAQ's updates through spotting errors or suggesting other features or edits, consider adding to the conversation in my Discord server. The remainder of this video will be an analysis and review of the Chaos Space Marines 9th edition Codex, wherein I'll highlight elements of WhatTheFAQ which relate to the areas of contention. So, let us begin. Let the Galaxy Wanton. As mentioned in my Chaos Combat Doctrines video, I find the prospect of doctrines after such a long wait to be dull, and their naming convention to be a bit silly. However, in spite of this, these Chaos Doctrines have greater mechanical breadth when it comes to the applicable weapon types it affects, and exploding hits is also a better mechanical abstraction compared to the Loyalists' doctrines. And so, while Wontons are not the mechanic I personally would have liked to see, I will say they are adequate. The only amendment, FAQ'd in on the general level, is referring to the 3 phases as Devastator, Tactical, and Assault Wontons, as this naming convention removes the muddiness of the terms Massacre, Slaughter, and Destruction, which are all synonyms of each other. However, Combat Wontons do have a rather glaring omission on the subfaction level, that being, Legion-specific Wonton bonuses are absent. This is an undeniable lack when compared to the Loyalists' colloquial super doctrines, and in its place the traitors have a bonus to their flamers. While this mechanic is not bad in itself, it is a poor stand-in that seems to only be here because flamers being auto-hitting weapons cannot benefit from the exploding hits Wontons provide, and a bonus to flamers creates a nice pun with a classic rules name. Regardless, it's an inefficient stand-in for a lack of super doctrines. And for clarity, it's not bad because of power disparity, though there is merit to that. My argument is that it's bad because the absence creates a narrative and thematic disparity. Having super doctrines allows the Loyalist Marines' narrative and flavor to shine through in a limited but undeniably potent fashion. For example, it's quite cool that the Salamanders can flex Melt and Flamers better than the Loyalists in their tactical doctrine. That the Iron Hands can flex their cold logic using the weapons with greater destructive force with greater efficiency. This goes beyond the power boost it provides. It's thematic, and gives character to the subfaction. And the fact that the traitors do not have this capacity is, well, rather rude to the player base, to be blunt. To finally give them access to the system the Loyalists have had since 2019, and not grant them access to the component which matters most to each Legion's identity is abhorrent. In fact, I'd wager the vast majority of players who collect a Traitor Legion would much prefer a super doctrine to enhanced flamers when given the option, despite the limited window of functionality. And so Legion Wonton bonuses have been added to the FAQ. Legion rules. As mentioned in the intro, the Legions are fairly solid, meeting the expected standard of 9th edition rules writing, where the majority of the mechanics are written to a viable standard. But there are a few areas of note. The most glaring of which is the Night Lords. GW were so close. Improving the effective range of the leadership debuff to 9 inches is a step in the right direction, but still means units cannot make use of it on the turn they arrive from reserves. Following in line, what's worse is the second perk, which if you attack a unit that is below half strength, or if the target has a leadership characteristic of 5 or less, you can add 1 to wound with melee attacks. I am honestly beside myself on this one. How? How did this get past QA? Aside from the fact that multi-turn engagements are the less common outcome of attack activations, And aside from the fact that so many units have ways to mitigate leadership debuffs, and or already have a high enough leadership characteristic to deny this after factoring in the -2 from the first perk of this trait, how did GW end up feeling that the perk behind all of those gates should just be what the Blood Angels do for free? What they do automatically? It's nonsensical.
Brain scramblies.
And while I personally feel the Night Lord's trait is a good place to use an inverse of the Crimson Fist's tactic, where instead outnumbering their opponents provides a benefit to abstract the narrative of the Night Lords being dirty fighters, I don't want to deviate so much from such a new publication. So the base trait has been altered, so that the second perk now provides a less potent benefit that is more flexible, through rerolling ones to hit, which also extends to their ranged attacks, against units which are impacted by their leadership debuffs. This ramps up to the potent +1 to wound should players tech into fear mechanics, which should be encouraged if they are playing Night Lords. While it would be nice to ramp up from a reroll ones to wound, this would create a null value when used with Lightning Claws. More on that later, which I feel like Night Lords players would prefer to use, but I digress. Alpha Legion. This is admittedly small, but it's something I felt was interesting enough to expand upon. Regarding their trait, the Alpha Legion feels more of a fallback and shoot legion rather than a fallback and charge legion. Here's why. Let's look at what these two actions are abstracting. Both are exceptions to core rules, meaning they skew towards flexibility. So there is an argument to say either is suitable to serve as the Alpha Legion's trait. Though looking deeper, one can note that falling back and charging indicates a ploy for maximizing aggression, abstracting an underhanded, surprising, or sudden attack. However, falling back and shooting is indicating a calmer demeanor when faced with combat. It evokes discipline, tactical acumen, and control. These are qualities which the Alpha Legion exemplify better than any of their Legion contemporaries. And it's why I rate the current iteration of falling back and charging to be the inferior ruling. And so, a short line has been added to account for this in the FAQ, should it be to your preference. Custom Legion traits, or the lack thereof, is yet another glaring issue. The option of being able to create custom sub-factions is essentially a precedent at this point, with even the less prominent factions like Genestealer cults having this kind of system. And I'm not dumping on Genestealer cults here, but the reality is the Chaos Space Marines have a much deeper legacy in narrative history, which has been fleshed out, and the lack of enabling players to have rules for their own custom warbands and the many Chaos warbands which exist in lore is sorely missed. To that end, a section for Renegade traits has been included in the FAQ, operating in a similar manner as the Loyalists, where you can create a custom Legion trait from 2 component parts, with the additional feature of choosing a Legion Wonton bonus and an alignment for the warband, which essentially indicates if your warband has a fixed mark of chaos. Such a mechanism should be here because it ought to matter, as such a classification is crucial to the characterization of a Chaos Space Marine force, as GW demonstrates with their favorite legions. A third section has been added to the FAQ to include support for Renown Renegades, which offers trait, alignment, and Wonton bonus recommendations for some of the more prominent Chaos warbands, serving to address the exclusion of these warbands which were once held in the spotlight during Vigilus, along with providing the Dark Angels something to hunt.
Oh, hi, Mark.
Let's start with the good. Well, it's pretty great that the Marks of Chaos have tangible benefits. A Khorne unit will now be stronger in melee, and a Nurgle unit will be tougher. You get the idea. Marks now provide benefits. Now onto what is lame. Marks of Chaos can only be given to core and character units. This is lame because, in World, many of these units can indeed be marked to various Chaos gods, a precedent which has been set over the editions past, and which have been realized through great effort by hobbyists. And this now results in a paradigm where the mechanics penalize the hobby efforts of the community and further discourages it, which I think everyone will agree is unideal. This scenario is made even stranger on demon units. Not being able to mark demonic units like Possessed and Demon Engines flies in the face of how demons themselves function and how they are categorized. If demons are all aspects of the Chaos Gods, how does one become possessed by a demon, but then is unable to be marked to a specific Chaos God? How come Death Guard's Possessed can be marked Nurgle? How come the Thousand Sons Predators and various Demon Engines can be marked Tzeentch? It doesn't line up. Therefore, an addition has been factored in to accommodate the narrative allowance Marks of Chaos provide to the units which ought to have them. Continuing on, In what at first feels like a win, the new codex provides a keyword for Chaos Undivided. However, it has now become the default. It is what the Mark of Chaos in brackets keyword was in the previous codex, meaning it offers no benefit. I draw this as an issue because there are certain legions and warbands in lore which would be less narratively appropriate to be marked to a specific Chaos God. Those which should be marked Undivided are now weaker for it. The bizarrity is furthered if you were planning to play pure Renegades, wherein you may want to align with Chaos because they are against the Imperium, but do not worship the Chaos Gods themselves. But now in this current system, you must be marked Undivided. The counter-argument to this position is that, well, of course those marked to a Chaos God will be stronger. They are, after all, benefiting from their God's blessing. This is true, but it is only part of the equation. While blessings from the Chaos Gods should make one stronger, it should also take something as well. The Chaos Gods do not bestow power freely. It requires a cost, and points alone are insufficient. Points are for us on the tabletop. They don't exist in the narrative of what's being abstracted. Where this is done better is on the specialist legions like the Death Guard. Their sole devotion to Nurgle has made them tougher and more toxic, but it has come at the cost of their mobility, various fast and hard-hitting unit options typical of Space Marines, the other Chaos Gods' blessings, and their free will, though that one is much harder to abstract for play. This is in essence the same issue I've brought up in the past with character upgrades. That being, points alone for a performance boosting upgrade isn't enough to not take the upgrade, as it's always better to gain a mechanic at the cost of points if it's to your advantage. And so if there's a benefit to be gained, it cannot be balanced through points alone. There needs to be something tangible to lose. To that end, changes have been added to the FAQ, where the default state is now unmarked, and units which do not take a Mark of Chaos must be given the Mark of Vengeance. And to supplement that, mark benefits have been added for the Mark of Chaos Undivided and the Mark of Vengeance. Moving on to the final point of contention surrounding Marks of Chaos, which is that there's no tangible benefit for being wholly marked to a particular Chaos God. The reason why this ought to be accounted for is that there is a narrative precedence for Chaos Space Marine warbands which align themselves wholly to a singular god. See the warbands featured in Vigilus Ablaze. Under the framing of the new codex, these warbands incur not only a forced payment of points for their mark upgrades for units which may not optimally utilize them, but also a restriction from the other Marks of Chaos. These restrictions come with no tangible benefit for their singular devotion to that particular Chaos God. And so, added to the FAQ is a soul devotion bonus, where if a warband or legion is wholly devoted to a single Chaos God, they receive some semblance of a perk. Units. Shifting gears over to units, let's start with the big one, Chaos Lords. And I will be clear, the gutting of the Chaos Lord war gear options is vehemently anti-consumer and anti-hobby. Removal of war gear options because GW wants to only provide rules for what comes in the kit because they want to discourage third-party or 3D printing bits is incredibly petty and actively runs counter to the hobby and hamstrings theme and narrative. Speaking personally, am I supposed to be grateful that my Tzeentch marked possessed Chaos Lord with Jump Pack's wings are now just for show? That after having spent the time, effort, and material cost to create this conversion, it has now been rendered illegal for play. Way to reward the hobby. I have in the works a video focusing on the importance of customizability of leader-type characters, how they serve as the focal point, distilling all the central themes and war gear preferences of an army's character. To that end, what are the Night Lords, Chaos Lords, supposed to do? Ah, yes, you see? They can enjoy walking around and booping their foes with a thunderhammer. Very fluffy. Such excellent theme. Oh, excuse me. Actually, it's total trash. And I genuinely find it hilarious that the Night Lord's Crusade Army example in the Codex couldn't have a Chaos Lord with Jump Pack, because it's being hamstrung by its own rules, and so it's led by this abomination. And to be clear, no ill will to the hobbyist or the project itself. My point is that it's self-evident why this army is led by a Demon Prince and not a Chaos Lord. The war gear option limitations on the Chaos Lord are extreme. So extreme that the Chaos Lord can't even take a bolt gun. And I am well aware bolt guns are almost always switched from rather than to, but it's the principle. The Chaos Lord can't even take the weapon, which is most emblematic of its faction. The restriction of war gear options is a problem which permeates throughout the Codex, creating the problems I illustrated earlier in abundance. This design decision on GW's part creates ludonarrative dissonance. GW wants to change the mechanics, in this case the war gear options, to be rigid and only what comes in the box, as per the standards set by the new Primaris Space Marine units. It's still slightly absurd with Primaris, as there is no in-world rationale a Primaris Sergeant couldn't take standard issue war gear options, but for Chaos Space Marines it's vastly more absurd. Unlike the Primaris kits, these are not new units. Rather, they are newer kits of existing units which already possess the variety of options. And in lore, the Primaris Marines' generational separation makes it slightly more acceptable to have a rigid code of guidelines. For Chaos Space Marines, the notion runs counter to the fabric of their position. This is what creates the dissonance between the game mechanics and the narrative. So to compensate, a jump pack war gear option has been added to the FAQ for the characters which ought to have it, as well as expanding the melee weapons war gear list to include lightning claws, and creating a weapon list for bolt weapons. Demon Princes. Demon Princes use the old datasheet, despite the new model arriving shortly, and have lost the warp bolter option because, well, I can't discern why, but it follows in line with what's going on with the book. So enjoy cutting and pasting the new model's datasheet, or carrying it around, I guess. Harkin World Claimer. Harkin's weapons are certainly better ruled, and yet he continues to be the doofus of the Black Legion. His ability Lord of Raptors cannot work if he arrives from reserves with a unit of Raptors, and his ability Herald of the Apocalypse barely provides substantive value. For Harkin, amendments have been added to allow his Lord of Raptors ability to work when he arrives, and changing his Herald of the Apocalypse ability to allow him +1 jump pack unit to arrive from reserves on Battle Round 1, so he can better Herald the Apocalypse. Chaos Terminators. My initial position on the loss of melee weapon options and the homogenization of those options into a single accursed weapon was very cold. I felt it stymied the hobby. But then I realized it does the opposite. You can now proxy third-party 3D print whatever you'd like for them, all while making them smoother for play. This is, in my opinion, a pretty good trade-off for the loss of individual weapon profiles. The restriction to their combi bolters does the opposite. GW made these restrictions in the new datasheet so that the kit would be more valid as it comes, but they couldn't homogenize combi weapons like the melee ones because it would be a bridge too far. So instead they created an absurd list of options so the kit can operate as WYSIWYG even though nobody would want to, and almost certainly nobody built their Terminators in this fashion in the years past. So an inclusion for Terminator war gear options has been added. Aspiring Champions. Aspiring Champions 2 have had their war gear options gutted, rendering the loadouts of players ranging from conventional to thematic illegal. For all the reasons mentioned previously, it's unideal. And so war gear options for the Aspiring Champions of Legionaries, Raptors, and Havoc units have been amended to allow the conventional equipment they would often prefer. You're welcome, Night Lord's Raptor Champions. I figured I'd close out this review covering the front end. As you would expect, this book has the polish of GW's full-color, high-quality printed publications. It's packed with some flavorful lore updates, has the excellent model photography you'd expect, and even a few new pieces of artwork. But there is a glaring omission here, one I weigh fairly heavily. There are 0 heraldry guides for these historic Chaos Space Marine legions. Each playable subfaction has a 2-page spread, containing 1 to 2 pages of lore. The exception being the Word Bearers in the Black Legion, which have 4 and 6 respectively. As a world-building structure junkie, I greatly appreciate having definitions on how heraldry functions and is denoted within factions. And while the 8th edition Codex had heraldry guides that were less than robust, having nothing in this codex is certainly a step in the wrong direction. Review score. Despite having far better written, and certainly more valid rules where the absurd and nonsensical are clearly the rare cases, Codex Chaos Space Marines is marred by war gear option reductions, which are counter to the hobby, anti-consumer, and in some cases come across as arbitrary. The Marks of Chaos, while certainly more substantive than in the previous codex, falls short in its restriction, breaking the narrative cohesion of a player's force. The Codex lacks rules to realize custom warbands, as well as other Chaos Space Marine warbands in the narrative, and discourages sole devotion to singular Chaos gods. And Wontons, while superior in their function relative to doctrines, is lacking the most critical component when it comes to subfaction characterization. With a fact-up counter of 20, the final review score for Codex Chaos Space Marines is a 4 out of 10. Thanks for watching this Chaos Space Marines Codex review, and of course a special thanks to my patrons, Julius Maximus, as well as the others, who help keep the dream alive. I hope it was found to be enjoyable and informative. This was another bit of experimental content, so if you enjoyed this review format and would like to see more, let me know in the comments. Once again, the link to WhatTheFAQ Chaos Space Marines 9th edition is in the description of this video, and if you want to contribute to its upkeep, consider joining my Discord. So if you enjoyed this video, there is a like button, and if you want to help this channel grow, there is a subscribe button. There is also a bell button and a share button, so press the buttons you want to press. And with that, I will hope to see you guys in the next one.